We're looking at the most critical part of Australian landscape, the filtering of the water that's carrying compounds off this landscape. And we used to have a massive number of plants, but they were nearly all edible to the introduced animals. And so we end up with a willow tree and a blackberry, which used to compensate for the impact of those animals in their original countries. But here we've now got a mixture of the lot. The willow tree is doing its best thing. That tree was standing up straight a few years ago. A little bit of erosion occurred. The tree then fell over. Now it's got a mass of trees and a mass of root systems, all filtering, all returning sunlight back to the system and feeding more and more microinvertebrates and the whole food chain. And then we got our natural plants. These are introduced apparently as well, but in there is Phragmites. But we would have had, when you can see the remnants of a few, you can see the water plants. All those are photosynthesizing and returning product to a food chain. And the difference that we tend not to recognize is that each of those green leaves is a solar panel producing product. And so we get this tree growing and then once a year feeding the system and then allowing everything to utilize that under the tree because sunlight gets in. We are ignoring all these massive efficiencies and how carbon, which in Strzelecki's reports was 18%, with another 15 to 20% of organic material in the system. That was the Australian landscape. That's the profit that farmers exploited stupidly up to now, and now we don't have it in most places. So we've got massive floods, nothing managing the water, nothing filtering the water. In fact, it's illegal today. Once the water gets into a stream, we're not allowed to do anything about it. And the whole landscape relied entirely on the recycling of material. And so when you get into here, it shouldn't be hard for people to realise how much sunlight is being converted into food every day. And any farmer that says, well, hell, I can do that because we've got a dam in the Hunter Valley, not just a river, way up on the side of the hill, which is designed exactly the same as a river system, doing exactly the same things as I've just described. So every farmer can do it, and it's not going to cost him anything.
So you're saying this, the current New South Wales State Water Management Act is preventing farmers from doing a better job on their farms? Absolutely.
The water and environmental management research that's gone on in Australia has been based from a European paradigm where they had freezing and thawing in a regular climatic cycle. This landscape has to respond to a rain event at any time. It means that the most efficient processes had to be in place for this landscape to get to the level of productivity it was. And then we're watching it destroy itself simply because as these plants and this energy is, and you'll get a photograph just 3 years ago where this was just a gravelly bed with nothing in it. Now, my hope is that all these flow lines become filtering systems and they're sufficiently shaped that we can mow them and return all this material to a high point on the property where the cycle is then automatic, costs people nothing.
So at this point, 4 years down the track, would you at any point introduce grazing animals into short-term grazing here, or we best leave it and mechanically move it?
Well, I've got people doing both. There's plenty of people, once they understand the impact of the introduced animals, have no problem doing it. But it's something that you have to be a bit careful about and have to understand the impact. My personal opinion is when you put cattle in an area like this, they stomp on a lot of the feed, 30 or 40%, and they dung on 30%. So you're potentially losing a 60% productive potential. And what we're trying to do is filter water and get that back out where it won't get taken away in a flood. As soon as you start recycling and putting dung down here, you're going to lose more. So there's a number of reasons why. Firstly, the 60% increased production would cover all your costs of moving it. Secondly, you've got erosion proof. Thirdly, every tonne you move from here to the top of the hill means at least 5 tonnes of water, and more likely 10 tonnes, is not going to come down and damage this place next time it rains. So there's just an escalating thing, and none of this is conjecture. This is absolutely based on simple facts.
Peter, if I was a molecule of water, can you describe what would happen to me here in a 24-hour cycle?
Well, each molecule of water here is recycled in such a way that it gets brought up by that plant, it cools, so it takes in a lot of heat, and then is dissipated in the landscape. Because of the amount of green that's here, those molecules don't have enough heat to rise out of this system, so as soon as they get out and they lose a bit more heat, they're at a point where they are going to fall back into the system again. So then they're reused. As soon as there's a bit of cooling or whatever, or they get into denser vegetation, they recondense and the plants use it again. So you've got this 100% efficiency in water use, maybe every day.
All right, so can you explain what's been going on over that time period, over those few years?
Well, the most critical issue was that there was no biodiversity left in the creek. The creek had been grazed, it had been eroded, and as is happening in every other part of Australia today, all the natural fertility was washed out of that surface layer. Anything that the water could roll over and move, obviously anything that was soluble was gone, and was gone from here. So we basically triggered high up in the system. We've gathered about 5 or 6 truckloads of blackberry residue, put it in the creek. That triggered a liquid fertiliser, and the thing went boom. And it's just been reported to me that the invertebrate count is double that of a natural system at the present time. Now, we did the similar sort of thing at Barramel, and it's obviously a catchment from the Wollombi National Park, where the Wollombi pines reside, and it was double in the first test. And because we were doing a joint venture with the authorities, they wouldn't test it again, because they said, in fact, because of the way we were going about it, it would be detracting from the health of the stream. And in fact, when it doubled the capacity, they didn't want to know anymore.
So what's the significance of having double the invertebrate biological activity?
Well, my reading is it's just a recovery cycle. And in fact, we're probably still only 10 or 20% of what was here before it was all disrupted. So I would expect and hope that, in fact, over the next year on year, it will double.
So if the average farmer says, if I do this type of work on my farm, first question, what's in it for me? And is there an economic benefit for the farmer to do this work in terms of just pure production, making money?
The greatest loss of every farm in Australia has been through erosion. Liquid fertiliser washed away, liquid compounds from the landscape, loss of your environmental asset. We cut a very small percentage out in product. We lose probably 80 to 90% to erosion in a climate like this, under the activities, agricultural activities that we presently use. So we're just trying to reproduce the most efficient way that this landscape once functioned. And by doing that, we're filtering, we're not allowing that loss of environmental asset. And so any farmer who does that obviously has got an 80% potential of increased production at a nil additional cost, because it's all moved by gravity. It happens at each rain event. So if he can get fertility filtered and back to an appropriate part of his property, or in a series of alleys or whatever, using the contour system, his first cost is his last cost, and from then on he can build the system. Because don't forget, we are all using the results of sunlight and plant activity. Even the reserves in the soil were created the same way. And what we're trying to do is stop the losses and increase that production of material from sunlight and plant systems. And that can't be more expensive, because you get it all for nothing.
if a farmer thinks he's getting more water for nothing, he'd be tempted to start pumping it out and irrigating. You'd be saying that would be the last thing you'd do. You'd actually use this water for environmental benefit.
Well, in an environmental situation, this is why I mentioned the efficiency of the Australian landscape. It was able to recover water many times, just in the Amazon. They get the water back 7 times, either through a dew cycle or a rain cycle. And so once we get a landscape that's hot, the water has got so much heat in it that it rises straight out of the landscape. It's lost. So we're now losing between 50 and 60% of all water that falls on the land back to evaporation. Whereas if this was managed carefully and the farming systems we used, let me just jump straight to a mulch farming system, we would probably recover 40-odd% of that water that's presently being lost. And potentially the Australian landscape had got to the cycle where this recovery daily was many times, probably 7 to 20 times, that same water would be recovered, but all the time it's being producing production. So the plant, as it photosynthesizes, has to use water. If that's a cool enough process, because there's enough plants there, that water stays and is available for the plants next evening. So that's not even part of the rain cycle, it's part of the daily water cycle, which is the most critical water in the landscape.
So in many ways, we get a water gain in
Absolutely.
the system. And you're advocating that gain should be used for more environmental benefit.
Well, it's production. You know, we're all talking about we must increase production. So the more we can recycle that water and get production, clearly it's 100% profit at each cycle. And, you know, anything that deviates from that is as bad as a 70% loss or more each cycle.
What's the problem with the current legislation?
Well, current legislation based on freezing and thawing, what we're looking at is an illegal structure. We've got a special dispensation to put it in, but the difference is obvious. The difference of how much more filtering, recovery, and more essentially production. We are getting CO2 out of the atmosphere into this plant material, and we're feeding everything in the process. And it doesn't matter if you can't eat this particular plant, that material put through the environmental microprocessor will grow anything. So we're just looking at continual production.
The governments need to change legislation. What do you see the process? A big bunch of people or a bunch of universities or a bunch of farmers to get this change happening?
To change where we're at, I believe, is just an exercise in common sense. And I think our forefathers left the facility in our laws. It's just that there's been a few cowboys gotten into the thing wanting to do water trading and other bits and pieces. And we've ignored the fact that what's happening and what the government's doing is fundamentally illegal against the Constitution. And you know, our Constitution is based on European laws where if you destroy the environment, you've broken the law. And I think we've got to get back to that. That's the simple issue. And we then sort of say, well, we just have to look at the law from the point of view that this Australian landscape has given us a blueprint of the most efficient way to do things, and have that the basis of the law.
So we've got different pieces of legislation, different levels working against each other that work against...
Not even coexisting. They don't even relate to one another in some cases. You know, we've got legislative systems where the departments don't even talk to one another. You know, it's just diabolical. And I mean, I know that is an illegal process. If you're involved in something where you have a duty of care to the public, you also have a duty of care to analyse the whole process that you're dealing with, and they're not doing that, and that's obvious everywhere.
So, as well as the legislation problems, do you think government employees should be doing more work in better ways? They should be earning their money a bit better.
Look,
maybe.
The government employees are just a reincarnation of the yes minister type thinking. They make a simple mistake 50 years ago and perpetuate it as if it's not a mistake. That is illegal. And we have, and we can prove that today. We only got to stand and look at simple functions. And you can go right from, Queensland to Western Australia and absolutely, without any doubt at all, clarify the stupidity in all this. And what the bureaucrats need to do is go and have a look. And if they can't explain what they're looking at, then they have to go back to school or do something. This is Australia. This is not Europe. It's not what the universities are teaching. They're teaching a system that's based on, Roman knowledge, and that was based on, knowledge from 1,000 years before, and everywhere in the landscape it's failed. So why are we doing it?
What do you see the role of big agribusiness in all this problem? So big agricultural investment is obviously trickling into Australia regularly. What sort of line are they pushing in terms of, are they lined up with government policy or?
Look, big agricultural or big business, no matter what, doesn't want to be stupid. The fact is, if they're forced to be stupid, they will, and they'll take advantage of whatever options they can get in that process. So I can't believe that if a thing that can return you all your capital outlay in 3 years, which the reincarnation of this landscape does, would mean that big business not interested. That's just not how it would work.
You're not going to run down another wombat's hole and get beaten up?
Hi, Wombat.
Because there's a couple of wombats around here.
Good girl, Rose. Good girl.
Where are the kids? Good girl.